we're going to start with a prayer led by Father Matt Ippo, SJ, who is joining us from Maban, South Sudan.
Thank you, Cindy, and good afternoon from South Sudan. So as we begin this, our town hall, with this prayer, I'd first like to invite you into a composition of place. So I invite you to close your eyes, and place yourself in Maban County in northeastern South Sudan, where 4 refugee camps house over 150,000 displaced persons. The horizon stretches endlessly under the vast African sky. Red clay dust settles on everything, your skin, your clothes, between your teeth. The camps spread before you with white and blue plastic sheets, traditional homes made of branches and mud, narrow pathways worn smooth by countless footsteps. You see children playing with toys made from bottle caps and wire, though some appear thinner than before. At the health clinics, there are longer waits for care with reduced medical staff. The school buildings stand partly empty with fewer trained educators, and families stretch smaller rations across longer periods. You hear conversations increasingly turn to concerns about the future, about fewer resources and reduced support. And in this context of reduced humanitarian assistance, you witness both profound vulnerability and extraordinary resilience. Communities strive to support one another. Neighbors share what little they have. Some teachers work without pay. Health workers stretch limited medicines. And many youth plunge into their studies, seeing education as a path towards a more hope-filled future. This changing reality has revealed both the depth of human need and the remarkable capacity for solidarity and resilience of communities that have lived through so much violence and dehumanization. Loving God, you are present in the camps of Maban, as surely as you are present in every corner of our world where people seek refuge. The faces we've contemplated here represent countless others across the globe, in urban settlements, border towns, detention centers, and communities where JRS accompanies forcibly displaced people. As we gather today, guide our discussions about the challenges we face. In times of reduced humanitarian assistance and changing policies, strengthen our resolve to continue walking alongside those who have been forced to flee. Open our hearts to hear clearly the effects of these changing realities and how they impact our JRS projects worldwide. Fill us with gratitude for the partners and benefactors among us today whose generosity enables our continued service. Transform our contemplation into action, our prayer into service, and our gathering into a renewed commitment to accompany the vulnerable wherever they may be. Grant us the courage to speak boldly for justice, the wisdom to navigate complex challenges, and the hope that sustains all who serve. And we ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Matt.
You're welcome, Cindy. Thank you. I'd like to now introduce Kelly Ryan, JRS USA President. Kelly, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. And again, for all of you who don't know, Matt was just recently ordained, so congratulations. It was a really beautiful experience to be with Matt and his fellow Jesuits who got ordained in Chicago. It was really an honor and a privilege. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I want to start off by telling you how delighted I am to introduce you to our new Vice President of Development, Matt Terhune. Matt is a highly experienced fundraising and nonprofit leader with more than 25 years of experience. He's been leading initiatives in higher ed and philanthropy. Matt has held senior leadership roles at the University of Southern California, UCLA, and Cal State University, and other nonprofits. His wide-ranging professional experience spans multiple sectors, including development, public health, medicine, social behavioral sciences, journalism, and communication. Fortunately for us, Matt is no stranger to Jesuit organizations. He holds an A.B. from Georgetown and master's degrees from Fordham and Pacific University. I'm going to turn it over first to Matt before I begin. So Matt, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I'm equally excited to join JRS at this critical moment. I have admired its work for many years. It is an honor to lead development efforts here and join this extraordinary team. It also feels like an incredibly meaningful moment that integrates my years working in global health and development and higher education, and my long-standing love and respect for Jesuit values and tradition. But I want to begin by expressing my gratitude, my deep gratitude, for the commitment of every person in this town hall. Your philanthropy has sustained our mission and is perhaps now more important than ever. Even in less than a week as the Vice President of Development at JRS, which has been thrilling, it's clear that the impact of philanthropy at JRS is matched only by the passion, intelligence, and advocacy of its donors and staff. I know that drastic actions by the current administration over the past several months have had a devastating effect on domestic and global humanitarian efforts. Actions that will literally reshape the way we fund the advancement of our mission. I want to assure you that we will be working diligently in the coming weeks and months and years to ensure our development team has the right structure, with the right people, and the most effective strategies in place. That we will partner closely internally with programs, communication, advocacy, and JRS leadership to position us to significantly increase our funding for the work that is most meaningful to us and to the communities we serve. And that we will honor your generosity by leveraging your philanthropy and broadening our funding base. We will engage individuals, corporations, and foundations with a sense of urgency and a renewed vision for JRS's future. And we'll seek strategic partnerships with organizations that complement our work. And we will tell our story, even as it evolves, to as many people as possible. We are more grateful now than ever for your support, and I look forward to working with each of you as we deepen your commitment to JRS's work and inspire others to join us. So thank you so much. And again, it's a thrill to be here. I'm going to pass it back to Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you to both the Matts, the two Matts. Well, that was wonderful to start with the prayer and with the introduction of Matt Terhune. I'm going to start with some of the more sobering and bad news that we've been experiencing or encountering at JRS and in the humanitarian sphere over the past 6 months. In the past 6 months, I can truly say they have been the most destructive period for refugee protection and development since our founding in 1980. A recent study published in The Lancet estimates that cuts to foreign aid, particularly those affecting USAID, could lead over to 14 million additional deaths globally by 2030. That includes 4.5 million deaths among children under the age of 5. These projections account for the impact of cuts not only to health services, but also to critical sectors like nutrition, education, water, and sanitation. This is absolutely disgraceful, and we need to keep the pressure on our government to try to avert these terrible outcomes. At JRS USA, we have been making the case for the robust need for U.S. foreign assistance for humanitarian development needs. We don't need more than $100 billion additional dollars for DHS immigration enforcement. We need instead to fund life-saving programs and create conditions where persons can thrive in their communities and not seek recourse to potentially lethal forced migration alternatives. In the past 6 months, I can assure you we've been tireless in our efforts to make the case for foreign assistance generally and our program values specifically. And we've spoken out also against Trump's mass deportation efforts, destruction of the refugee admissions program, efforts to end asylum and other humanitarian immigration programs like TPS. We've advocated against the accelerating and non-strategic use of immigration enforcement and detention, with now more than 60,000 persons detained in our country, as well as the unconstitutional efforts to end birthright citizenship. In our advocacy, I'm proud to say we've seen a huge rise in our support. Our supporters, we're calling them JRS advocates. There's been a 300% increase, and we've had a 400% increase in actions of the advocates that they're taking. And they and we are engaging. We've conducted hundreds of meetings with Hill staffers. We've worked in partnership with the Jesuits, other Catholic organizations, faith-based and secular organizations, adjusting our message to meet people where they are and to make a strong case for refugee protection. We've also advocated for return to the rule of law and immigrants' rights. We've been a leader in using authentic Catholic social teaching. The Church's teachings appeal to persons of all political stripes when they're explained to them, and they then embrace the right to stay in the home country, the right to migrate, and the right to return in safety and dignity. We've raised up the concepts of the common good, subsidiarity, solidarity, and the dignity of each person. We are making ground, but it has been a dark period of nativism, moral relativism, and nihilism. I'm extremely proud of the fact that with Don Kerwin's arrival, we've developed a serious and ambitious advocacy plan, and we're executing it. We were honored to host, for example, Cardinal Baggio of the Dicastery on Human Development and the newly installed Washington Cardinal McElroy, who keynoted at our Catholic Social Thought in a Time of Turmoil. C-SPAN covered 4 of our 8-hour seminar live, and you can still view it on YouTube if you haven't seen it. We've placed editorials in blue and red states around the country in the Buffalo News, Federal Newswire, Knoxville News, Real Clear Politics, Daily Independent, Washington Post, America Magazine, with the AP, the Associated Press, Idaho Statesman, Kansas City Star, Baton Rouge Advocate, the Daily Star, the Oklahoman, our Sunday News Visitor, the New York Times, Notice, Catholic News Agency, Boston College Magazine, National Catholic Reporter, the Pinnacle Gazette, UPI, National Catholic Register, and the San Francisco Chronicle. Just this week, Don published an excellent, excellent summary piece in Bloomberg that I would point you to. He will also share some of the more critical contributions he has made with you all, with the advocates. And Hillary Chester, who will be on a bit later, will talk a little bit about the great rethinking we've had to do and will do on how we can support programs around the regional and country offices around the world. We remain extremely grateful to you, our supporters, that we could keep going when other NGOs completely dependent on the U.S. government or an international organization had to shut their doors overnight. With JRS, for us, as we focus on integral development or holistic care, the whole person for accompaniment and refugees and displaced persons, it's clear to us that any short-term reliance on U.S. government supports would be ill-founded. Let me walk you through some of the key decision points we've taken over the past 6 months. On January 20th, when the Trump administration issued its 90-day pause, we were alerted that we had a stop work order executed on all 9 of our State Department programs in Chad, Colombia, Ethiopia, India, Iraq, South Africa, South Sudan, Thailand, and Uganda. We rapidly alerted our country office partners. We instructed them that they could no longer carry out activities using U.S. foreign government assistance monies. We asked them how to consider what they wanted to proceed, how they wanted to proceed, and to develop plans and budgets with them to be able to carry out activities using monies we would try to identify. While many nonprofits were forced to close, we drew on our own reserves, generous contributions through a JRS USA board match and our private donors, and we provided $2.5 million of emergency funding to address what we called the core needs and to keep programs running through the entire 2025 year, the calendar year. The State Department then partially reinstated our programs in South Sudan and Colombia in March, and then they unlawfully terminated the other 7 grants. Adding to the termination of the 7 grants, 13 other JRS country offices face significant funding reductions from partner organizations responding in part to the federal cuts. While the Trump administration has publicly stressed, quote, life-saving humanitarian assistance in its statements on redirecting foreign aid, our government has defined the term narrowly in contrast to integral human development. We at JRS remain committed to serving the whole person and to programming that ensures displaced persons not only survive, but thrive. We are deeply grateful for the urgently needed support that enabled us to extend strategic priority programming to the end of 25, rather than the end of fiscal year, the end of the fiscal year in September for our impacted countries. So now that we're beyond the emergency period, in the past 2 weeks, we've had more very sobering news. USAID has been fully shut down, and foreign assistance right now has been reduced by 86%. Every country in which JRS serves has been negatively impacted by the chaotic destabilization of the international humanitarian system. Our key international organization partners providing basic needs like the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and the World Food Program now operate at a reduced capacity, potentially 1/3 of what they would need to operate at full capacity. Friends and colleagues at the Department of State are nervously awaiting layoffs in the thousands and undergoing a restructuring that will tremendously and negatively impact humanitarian assistance. But thanks to you, this abrupt loss of programming and funding did not stop our global life-saving programs. In the face of what has happened, I want to assure you, in the face of this crisis, that our mission, our character, and our values remain constant. We're going to continue to accompany displaced people in 58 countries, and we're going to continue to do so because we're driven by our mission and our spiritual imperatives, not political ones. I want to say again, thank you for supporting us during this extraordinary emergency. We will always accompany, serve, and advocate for refugees because we are JRS. We ask for your continued support, including your prayers. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Vice President of Advocacy, Research, and Partnerships, Don Kerwin.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And I just wanted to say up front that it's great to be working with ED and colleagues who are so committed to advocacy and so good at it as well. To build on some of Kelly's points on advocacy, I'll make just 6 quick interventions. First, we've been very much trying to build our base of JRS advocates, and that is people who take action on the Hill with the administration and in other venues against policies that we oppose and in favor of policies that we support. We've done this through weekly action alerts, which often cover several issues, as well as petitions, lobby days, and individual Hill meetings. We try to sign up potential JRS advocates at events through our communication strategies and by dint of the timeliness and quality of our appeals. Second, we've been mostly focused on Hill advocacy, but not exclusively. We've produced, as Kelly indicated, many op-eds. We've joined an amicus brief of pending litigation. We've participated actively in coalition work. We'll be doing more administrative advocacy, not on the Hill, but kind of before the federal agencies in the near future. Next week, for example, we'll submit comments on the need for some kind of a mechanism to offer legal status to assist stateless persons in the United States, for example. Third, we've also initiated a process to preserve and we hope ultimately rebuild the U.S. asylum system that involves former government officials and NGO experts on asylum. It's really shocking, I've got to say, that asylum isn't available to people at or increasingly within our borders, even people in immigration court. That's a direct violation of the law. And, and the federal judge has recently held as much. People are also being detained in terrible conditions and removed to third countries to which they have no connection at all. And the enforcement infrastructure, ICE agents, private detention centers, and the like will be growing beyond recognition by the recently passed budget bill. Fourth, most of our advocacy over these last 6 months has been grassroots advocacy, with a particular focus on Republican members of Congress. We could probably at this point do more grass tops advocacy, meaning people who have a direct and strong relationship to policymakers, including board members and others in the Jesuit world. So if you're one of those people, we would want to meet you and kind of learn about that connection. And we likely need to do more on a state and local level too, and possibly in support of litigation in opposition to the administration's mass deportation program. Fifth, we'll be regularly pivoting now from one set of issues to the next. After the budget and appropriations issues run their course later this year, we'll be more focused on mass deportation, including detention, and the effect of enforcement on Jesuit institutions and the practice of faith more generally. And sixth, I'd just like to make a point about the final point on the importance of Catholic social teaching to our policy and advocacy work. Catholic social teaching provides a vision that's, of course, very much at odds with the administration's view of refugees and undocumented residents. And it really grounds all of our policy positions. It speaks to the need for solidarity with these brothers and sisters. It lifts up our migrant forebears, biblical and otherwise, the Holy Family, the Jewish people, and countless others who were refugees or forced migrants in our tradition, and the fact that we'll all be judged based on our treatment of the least. It also charts the way forward to responding to the needs of refugees in their time of need. It recognizes them for who they are, not invaders or criminals or illegals or rapists or snakes, as they've often been portrayed even by our president, but human beings in very difficult circumstances, human beings whose protection, ability to work, families, freedom, as well as their ability to stay at home, to migrate safely and legally, and to enter our country, have all been negatively affected by U.S. policies over these last 6 months. What Catholic teaching does is it points us to the need for an integral response to these problems, as Kelly stressed, and it's very powerful for that too. And I think it's important to lift up now, not just with small audiences, but with large audiences, including our co-religionists. And that would include our co-religionists in public life who make claims and speak about refugees and forced migrants in ways that aren't consistent with Catholic teaching. And finally, just Catholic teaching is very important. And I've recognized this throughout my career to lots of refugees and immigrants. It means a lot for them to be recognized for who they are and to be lifted up in the way that Catholic teaching lifts them up and reveres them. Let me stop there. I know that we're going to have a lot of time for questions and answers at the end, and I'm happy to answer questions, but let me stop and turn it over to Hillary Chester, who's our superb Vice President for Programs at this point.
Thank you, Don. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I understand that some of you may have participated in our first town hall, but many of you may not have. So I will just give a quick recap of really, to Kelly's point, what the impacts of these policy changes, some executive orders, changes in funding streams has had on the programs throughout the JRS family across the globe. And then really just, what we're doing with your support in particular and where we see ourselves going forward. Initially, we thought this was going to be a 90-day pause on programming while the Department of State funded programs were going to be reviewed and that looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. We felt very confident that we didn't have those kind of issues and our programming was very well managed, well monitored, effective. And so we made a big pitch to our supporters like yourselves to help us get through that 90-day stop work period while there were revisions being made, thinking that the funding would then be turned back on. Once it became clear that that wasn't going to happen, and then subsequent impacts where other organizations like the UN High Commission for Refugees, International Organization on Migration, USAID also had US government funding cuts as well, had to reduce their program funds going out to our JRS country offices in other parts of the world. We ended up really with a very big dramatic cut to the operational funding of our programs that had been funded by the Department of State, as well as these other U.S. sourced funds coming through other channels. In the end, it was nearly 22 country offices, programs that were radically impacted and reduced, as well as some of our regional offices that provide administrative and functional support to those country offices. We did have 2 programs reinstated in Colombia and South Sudan in particular, but they're still greatly reduced. They're in kind of a limbo. So we are very much reliant on the private funds that were raised through our global appeal that we held. And those funds enabled us to keep programming running. Much reduced programming, so not all of the activities continued. In some cases, the volume of people we were serving through our programs was reduced as well. We had a lot of staff layoffs and reductions in our country offices. Our sister organizations out in the country offices did have to make those kind of difficult choices. But unlike many other NGOs, we didn't cease operations entirely. We were able to really discern what are the most critical services, what are the services that will have the greatest impact on the greatest number of people that are filling gaps. And we really focused in on those and sustained those through that 90-day period and now beyond. We worked very closely with the international office based in Rome, with our Jesuit sister organizations, like through the Xavier Network, which was able to activate through a whole global network of Jesuit institutions, a global appeal. We were able to raise funding in order to then work with those 22 most impacted country offices to, again, really look at, what are the most critical services, what are the services that will do the most good and that will be sustainable at this new kind of reduced funding level. And so we were also very focused on that. We wanted to make sure that what we were supporting going forward with private funds could carry these offices through what are essentially now this bridge period. And so we were able to come up with core need budgets in collaboration and working with each office individually, and then push out private funds that we raised here at JRS USA through your generosity and your peers' generosity, and then again, the international office and the Xavier Network. And we have been able to provide funding for these 22 offices to continue some level of operations through the end of this calendar year. And in this bridge period, we are looking at and thinking about what are the core mission activities that we are the best at, that we can do most effectively, most efficiently, that will have the greatest impact on the people that we are serving and perhaps new people that we hadn't been serving. As to Kelly's point, a lot of other core services are being cut and greatly reduced. We also do want to think about sustainability. And so we're thinking a lot about building and strengthening local capacity. We've always been very focused on incorporating local staff and localizing our services. But more than ever, we really are thinking about and asking these country offices to really think about how can the funding that we have build up the local capacity there so that it is more sustainable in the long term. So these are the kind of programmatic questions that we're grappling with, and we're just grateful for the support that we had that you all have provided. That's really given us the space to make these kind of strategic changes and restructuring, quite frankly. And again, to Kelly's point, not all the NGOs out there in this environment and our sister organizations have had the capacity to do that. Many of them really did have to cease operations, terminate staff, and really leave their mission. So we're just so grateful that we haven't had to do that, and that we're grateful that we have you along with us as we move forward in this new environment. I do want to say that, as Dawn mentioned, not all of the policy changes that impact refugees and migrants were financially focused it. There have been policy changes that also have been impacting people, particularly here in the US, where it's not so much funding cuts that have impacted our programming and the people we serve, but it's the changes in policy, taking away people's access to seek protections and legal protections and asylum, stripping away legal statuses that people were given so that they could move through the asylum process and take the time to do that. And so we are seeing just a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear on the part of the migrants and asylum seekers and people who came here seeking protection in the interior communities, as well as our volunteers who serve and support them through our migrant accompaniment network. They also are feeling apprehensive, feeling anxiety, and then we've had some families who have been apprehended in the community, and we've had some families who really have just felt overwhelmed and have made the very difficult decision to think about going back to either their home country or a second country. So we have some volunteers that are really experiencing that same kind of grief as the migrants that they're accompanying. So we continue to appreciate your support, certainly financially, but the advocacy piece, I can't stress enough how important that is for us to regain the really positive, good, protective policies that this country has always had towards refugees and people coming here to seek protection. And then certainly volunteers. Our migrant accompaniment network is present in many cities around the country. They would love to have more volunteers working with them in their advocacy work at the local and national level, and then certainly accompanying families in these really difficult circumstances in the communities. And then if you want to start one, the current program, the current migrant accompaniment network action teams are really so gracious in being good mentors and helping new teams stand up and continue that mission work. I'm going to pass it now to my colleague, Patrick. I'm going to butcher his last name, Etemisor. I've never said his last name out loud. Sorry, I've always just called him. He is one of our regional directors in West Africa, and he can really describe in much more detail than I did just what the impacts on the ground are and where they're thinking of going forward. So thank you, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Hilary. It's evening over here, so good evening to you all. It is for me a pleasure to be present to talk about what is happening in my region. And I'm the regional director of the JRS region of West Africa and Great Lakes. And the countries in the region are Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Central African Republic. And in these 6 countries, as the case may be, we have programs and activities in education, principally, in psychosocial support, in livelihoods, and in protection. And through these programs, we attempt to accompany refugees and internally displaced persons in these various countries. But to simply paint the picture I'm about to, I think it might be best if I begin with a story. There is a Nigerian refugee, a 34-year-old woman called Fatimatu. She's a single mother of 4. She lives in the camp in northern Cameroon called Minawawo Camp. It's a camp that gathers people who have been victims of the Boko Haram insurgency. And 5 years ago, she fled her town in Nigeria, in northeastern Nigeria, carrying with her a youngest child on the back and holding the 3 other kids she had. Sadly, during the attack by Boko Haram, the husband disappeared, and it's been 5 years and she's still not heard from him. Today, she happens to be a single mother, taking care of 4 kids, aged between 3 and 11. And when you see them, you can tell these kids are suffering. They are visibly thin, with oversized tummies in some instances, and with hunger dulled, with eyes dulled by hunger. And long before sunrise, she has a habit she normally undertakes. She would walk barefooted to nearby farms around the camp to see if she could pick up a few leftover cassava peels. And for her, these peels she would use to make a soup when she returns for the kids. And sometimes she's successful, and sometimes some other times she isn't. But when whatever she gathers happens to be the only meal of the family for that day. And the 6-year-old son of hers called Idris is already showing signs of acute malnutrition. His hands are frail, his body is generally frail, and he's slowed down a bit. And over the last few months, she was able to rely, you could say in the past, she was able to rely on nutritional supplements from agencies funded by USAID, like the Catholic Relief Services, who were in the camp uh, giving out nutritional aids to the refugees there. But since the halt in the US funding, the situation has gotten very, very critical. And with no income, no food assistance, no school meals for the kids, Fatimatu must choose between sending her children to go beg or to stay at home. And she did, during an interview with us, with JRS, she told us that as a mother, she should be able to provide for her family. But now she only feels that she's watching them starve. And she prays that they go to sleep before they ask her what she's going to eat. And I think Fatimatu's story is not an exception. It is simply the effect of what these courts, have had on our programs and on the people we serve, on the refugees with whom we work, and also the internally displaced persons with whom we work. So in a brief nutshell, I would simply paint a picture in the different countries in terms of the exact implications of impact of these courts. I'll begin with Cameroon. In Cameroon, we currently partner with the UN Agency for Refugees, and they have told us that their budget has been cut by 70%. We had a large-scale livelihood project with them in the northern part of Cameroon. Currently, with no funding, that project has literally left 2,300 people without any form of aid or assistance. So as a result, we've been forced to shut down the JRS offices in the northern part of Cameroon. We've laid off over 11 staff, and we've also laid off 6 other coordinators whose salaries we simply can't meet. Now, when you come a little to, you could say, to the eastern part of Cameroon, where we also work, the Central African Republic, it is the same situation. The camps sound safe. There's literally no aid or funding opportunities left for partners to work with. There's a lot of anxiety and frustration as well. And it is simply impossible to ask our friends and our colleagues to give more in these circumstances. So as a result, because of the strain, we've had to, you could say sometimes simply fold our arms and watch from afar, even with the pain and heaviness in our hearts. Moving to Chad. Chad had one of our biggest educational programs in the JRS region of Western Africa and Great Lakes. And with the funding cuts, the UN Agency for Human Rights orchestrated just shortly after the halt in funds from funding from the US government, they were simply forced to shut down a lot of camps. They shut down their programming in the eastern part of Chad and in the southern part of Chad as well. And as a result, we could simply say the abandonment rate of kids in high school has literally gone, we could say, close to zero. Because families now are obliged to choose between either sending their kids to school or simply keeping them back to help them farm or go do other businesses. And sadly, another implication of the cuts is the fact that across the country, the UN Agency for Human Rights for Refugees was responsible for primary educations in the camps. That has simply been halted entirely. And with these halts, there's been an increase also in carjacking in the zones. So people have to survive. So somehow the folks in the camps have to find whatever means they have to get by. So carjacking, and in some instances, kidnapping as well. So which simply means our GRS colleagues in these zones are working under very severe psychological strain and stress as well. And what is simply even painful is the fact that these GRS colleagues of ours can't really tell if tomorrow they will be there because there is no funding simply to finance their roles in service of refugees and IDPs in the zone. I'll rush quickly to Nigeria before concluding. In Nigeria, the case has been a little mixed, I would say. The UN agency for refugees has simply shut down the entire offices they had in the eastern part of the country. That is all gone, closed. And I was told that they are closing down the operations in the country by about 60%, which leaves a very huge gap in terms of assistance to people who are in need. And beyond that, one of the direct impacts of these cuts is the fact that there was a helicopter ride for humanitarians from one of the capitals in the northeastern part of Nigeria to deep field locations. Now that the UN has simply told us that they will be unable to hold or support rather these costs. So as a result, gaining access now to deep field locations to meet people and their needs has become simply impossible. And also, UNICEF just informed us that they are also cutting down their funds by about 40%. So it simply means in a country where you have over 5 million out-of-school children, there will simply be more kids who would be out of school again, and whatever danger that carries also for the long-term survival and well-being of the country and the people in the country as well. To conclude, I would finish with the Democratic Republic of Congo. I mean, this is a country that has been in some protracted crisis for decades. And in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, we have a sizable operation in Goma. I think it is important to also note that currently this entire zone, they call them the North Kivu and South Kivu provinces, are currently being controlled and held by rebels, the M23 rebels. And I know the US government is helping to deflate that situation and the tension that is there. And since the arrival of these rebels, we've been simply unable to realize the same amount of work. Access to people is simply impossible today. Even if it is possible, it is with a lot of difficulties. And the fact that these rebels, sadly, are still recruiting children who can no longer go to school into their services, for whatever selfish ends they have, just leaves us, could say, powerless in the face of these painful situation. And I think it is one of our offices, I would say, with the most stressful conditions. Our workers, the GRS colleagues of ours, they have to come to work under the watchful eyes of these rebel leaders who run the utilities and control the city. They have to report whatever it is that they do. Our movement is strictly controlled, and that leaves a lot of gap. So it simply means whatever services we desire to give is simply almost impossible, or is simply hindered because they feel they should have more direct access to the people than the partners themselves. So in a nutshell, for the GRS region of Western Africa and the Great Lakes, we see the same patterns where there's lack of access. We have more kids, more out-of-school children who simply cannot go back to school. And we have families who are unable to support their kids to go back to school and to stay in school, where retention is actually a major concern. And down the road, we can see in clear terms if some of these incidents are not reversed, where we would eventually end up. So thank you so much, and I'm I'm deeply grateful. Thank you. Over to you, Cindy.
Thank you, Patrick. I realize that this update is rather grim, but I also think that many of you may have questions, and so go ahead. You can type your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and I think Nick will alert me if anyone puts their hand up to ask a question. There are a couple of questions that we received ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and direct the first one to Patrick. And Patrick, that is, we have many programs overseas and in your region that have been privately funded either by individuals or small organizations. I'm thinking of Watoto Reed as an example. How have those privately funded programs been affected by the foreign aid cuts? Can you address that?
So I think one of the major problems has been the fact that a lot of the private funds we received in my region were to support the government funding we were receiving. So the gaps we identified that the US government funding, for example, couldn't cover, these private funds, stepped in to cover these gaps. And a simple example would be in Chad, where about 2,800 high school kids were just preparing for their final high school exams, were earmarked to write this exam. And with the funding cuts, sadly, you could say less than 2,000 eventually sat for those exams. And somehow, even the 1,800 kids that sat for the exam eventually did, thanks to the funding we received from JRS USA and from some of the friends of ours present here. And one other example would be the Democratic Republic of Congo, where, for example, we had received some funding from UNICEF, but just when the funding cut kicked in, they had to cut back. And these funds were meant to renovate and rehabilitate some schools. And somehow through some funds collected again, gathered from North America through JRS USA and through some friends in Canada, some of these schools were rehabilitated. And today, these classrooms and schools are able to hold kids, keeping them away from danger and able to play around as kids, just be kids. So to a large extent, the private funds we receive simply allow us to go further and farther than sometimes than beyond the restrictions the government funding sometimes would place on us. So I would simply say with the reduction in government funding, and also in some instances also the fact that the private funding in some areas such as do so much more, but still isn't enough to cover the gaps there. We simply find ourselves unable to go as far as we normally can or would like to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
Another question for Don. We've had a huge growth in advocates, JRS advocates, and for those who have not signed up to be a JRS advocate, what can we do at the grassroots level to help advocacy?
Yeah, I think I guess my response to that is that I feel like we can't really do anything at the national level without your all activism at a grassroots level. I mean, Hill visits aren't successful if they don't involve constituents. National office staff going in is not always a successful way, generally not a successful way to get the attention of members of Congress. And so we really heavily depend on you all to be active, and all of our advocacy is built around that. And for now, we've been very much focused on building up that group of people that we can call on to intervene with Congress or with the administration or with federal agencies. And we're going to continue to do that. And please, it's easy to sign up on our website to get these calls to action. And please do go ahead and do that. And it's going to change pretty much every week, as I indicated. I'd say this too: if you're not motivated to do this, think about the policies that we're talking about here. And I'd just like to kind of make a point about them, which is that they're all based on cruelty. It's not that it's of course the policies themselves are cruel, but where they can make them crueler, they've actually done that. So it's not just deportation, it's deportation of people to dangerous third countries to which they have absolutely zero ties. They've set fees for asylum and for humanitarian immigration benefits, for example, that are now so high that many people aren't going to be able to access those forms of relief that are available to them by law and under our laws. They not only suspended indefinitely the refugee resettlement program, but they didn't allow the 22,000 people, Afghans and refugees who had been approved for resettlement to come into the country, which they could have easily done. As Hillary mentioned, and as the Trump administration did during their first go at leadership, the strategy hasn't been just mass deportation. It's been to actually strip people of status. It's been to illegalize them and then to seek to deport them or to expose them to deportation. There's the detention in horrendous conditions. I think that the worst part of the U.S. immigration system for a long time has been the detention system. And to think that the conditions are getting worse, the facilities are going to be more privatized, and the growth is going to be as astronomical as it is something that's really, really troubling. They've railed against life-saving foreign assistance at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives. That's being documented as we speak, and with only very marginal savings. And they've thrown their longtime NGO partners who do the overseas refugee assistance work and do refugee resettlement in the United States and do work in detention centers totally under the bus and into a tailspin. So I think we also depend on you all to document a lot of these abuses. And that's extraordinarily important to do that on a grassroots level, both kind of the effect on immigrant communities, but also the effect on church institutions, which is rather extreme. And we recently received a notice about a Los Angeles parish that had 25 teenagers who were going to be confirmed, who didn't show up for their own confirmation ceremony because they were afraid to attend that ceremony. So it reminds me a lot of what Patrick was talking about children that just kind of lose the opportunities to do things, both in the United States, more severely, of course, and the places that he was talking about. But the effect is the same and the cause is the same, which is cruelty and selfishness. And I think that the American people are not ultimately going to tolerate these kinds of abuses. They're not as cruel as their administration is at this point. And so that's kind of an opportunity for us. But we really do depend on you. We really can't do anything without your help. And always feel free to contact me personally or if you want to get more involved as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Does anyone have a question for any of the panelists.
I have a question, Cindy.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Bill Curtin. It's very nice to be invited and participate in the wonderful things you're doing. I have a very basic question, and apologies because I had to Don, Cindy, Kelly join the conversation a little late. If for a lay person outside, not involved inside, but who very significantly through the wonderful Leo J. O'Donovan loves JRS very much. At this time and given all the circumstances at hand, what could someone like such as myself or people similarly situated to myself do that's the most helpful to JRS? Is that as easy as a capital contribution fundraising exercise, or is there something less obvious and more subtle that would make Father Ippel proud of us?
Thank you, Bill. It's great to see you. So I think as Don mentioned just a few minutes ago, signing up to be an advocate and exerting the influence that as voters we all have on our elected officials to try and change policy. That is absolutely, we need every single person, and we need particularly people in red and purple states to begin advocating for more humane policies. And funding, I mean, if it wasn't for funding from private individuals, as Hillary and Matt and Kelly have already highlighted, we would have had to shut down even more programming. So private funding at this moment in time is really critical. And so, yes, if many of the people on this call have already given and have made sacrificial gifts, many of us who work for JRS have made sacrificial gifts, but that is helping to keep people alive.
May I ask a quick follow-on question, Cindy? I apologize for taking too much time, but
no.
For folks who do not particularly appreciate or endorse either extremes in the spectrums that are out there, but like to see people come together and consider themselves more centrist, are there ways that JRS is giving us the power to express that helping refugees really shouldn't be a political extreme susceptible to any of that? This is about being humane and decent. And it's not, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Are we approaching it at JRS, if that makes sense to you, that way, so that we're not allowed to be pigeonholed and thrown out because of association with some other extremist view?
Let me jump in here, and maybe then I'll turn it over to Don. But Bill, that's exactly what our message has been, to be really clear. We believe that these are humanitarian principles or Catholic principles. They can be explained well and understood by anyone of faith or no faith. And we believe that the main group that we need to go after is that movable middle. And they are really critical to changing what's happening on Capitol Hill, what's happening in the White House, and even in our communities. So a lot of our messaging and the data and evidence shows it, that overwhelmingly Americans support immigration. They believe that it is right. They believe it's not an either or on foreign assistance. They believe it's a both and, that we need to take care of Americans at home and help people overseas. So we've been very deliberate and strategic about our messaging and work very hard on that. And you'll see, I mean, I can send you some of the op-eds, but each of them target, like, their red state op-eds to talk about the impact on foreign assistance to U.S. farmers. There's ones talking about ties to old Catholic traditions in Louisiana, and how this is a common fact for 300 years there. So yeah, we are 100% with you on the we need to reach the movable middle, and we're doing that. we have strong progressive support and we have a little bit of conservative support, and we're bringing that on. I would say when we went to the Hill, and I'll turn it over to Don, we got excellent reception from almost every Republican member we met with. So we are making the case in language that speaks to whatever that audience is. And we're trying to meet people where they are in the Jesuit tradition, but also make the case using Catholic social thought. So I'll turn over to Don. I would say to your question, how can you help? I think it's three things. It is material. It may not be everyone on this call could give again, but they certainly know people that could give. So we're asking you to ask your friends and your foundations and your law partners and your business partners. We are also asking for political support through the advocacy. And then finally, I think as important as spiritual support, we're asking for prayers for our work and for the work of what Matt is doing and Patrick's doing on the ground, and for all of us, that we can succeed, because it is a very dark time of nativism. So the spiritual aspect can't be underestimated. But Don, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and if we've targeted anybody, we've targeted conservatives, Republicans, who we think and in the past have been heavily supportive of refugee protection and of immigrants. It's not an easy situation, I guess, that they're in, and when we go to the Hill, we hear a lot of we hear a lot of testimonies. These are mostly from staff, of course, about how supportive they are for refugee programs, and that they recognize the importance of this work, and they recognize the importance of foreign assistance. It doesn't always translate into kind of activism, or standing up in ways that we hoped, but nonetheless, we recognize that there's that support there. And for us, it's to root it in Catholic social teaching, which is not only, the current Pope or Pope Francis, but Benedict and John Paul II, and going back eons, actually, is, we think, a powerful way to do it. This is our tradition. This is what it says. This is what it teaches. And these are the people that we know and have worked with, at Jesuit Refugee Service and in other institutions all these years. And they're not the people that are being described in kind of the public debate. So we're very truthful about that, but we're not trying
Don,
to.
I just circulated to your whole team here, George Bush, previewing this. It might be worth, after the call, if people want to take that YouTube clip, watching that. I'm sorry to cut across you, Don, but it's a very powerful message from a Republican aligning with the values of JRS.
For sure. Yeah, no, he was great, but thank you.
This is Tom Pierce with a question.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Two comments, one involving advocacy and the second involving funding. On the advocacy side, I hope the two target people on and the government would be the Speaker of the House and his staff, assuming his staff. The other one is our Vice President and his staff. That both of those should be, as Christians they propose, should be more open to perhaps changing some of the policy questions. On the funding, I'm a numbers guy, and what would work for me and would work as I passed along the funding is, tell me what you received from the government last year, and tell me what, on the new case, what you're receiving then, and little about the programming, and say, look at our funding cut. Can you increase your donation? Or can you find someone else? That's rather blunt, but I think that's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. It's good to see you. To answer, Kelly, do you want to answer his question about what?
Sure, very quickly to Tom, and we can give more details to you, but for U.S. foreign assistance funding for the monies going overseas last year, it was 18 million. And out of that, we lost 6.8 million total. That's because some of the money had gone out before the January 24th decision, and also because we have 2 programs running. We do have some U.S. government assistance domestically with our chaplaincy program. But right now, we are really in a great state of uncertainty as to what will happen with the Hill on even the monies for this year. That the administration has sought to claw back all of the, most of the migration refugee account at the place at the State Department. So we're really working hard to try to avoid that. But we can give you the numbers and share that with you. And we are going to really pivot to foundations and to private donors. But when opportunities arise, we will continue to seek U.S. government funding just as a matter of principle and stay in the game.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And one question came in, if I have a relationship with someone at a major private foundation, who would it be helpful to make that introduction to JRS USA? Who should we direct that connection to? And that would be to our new VP of Development, Matt Terhune. And we are certainly looking for connections. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kristen, for that excellent question. I just answered you in the chat. But as I mentioned earlier, diversifying our funding base, bringing new individuals into the fold to inspire them to support JRS's mission, foundation partnerships, certainly corporate partnerships, are all going to become very important sooner rather than later. So
I have a little question, and that just is following up on Don Kerwin's observation about the parish in Los Angeles, where 25 of the children that were receiving instruction to receive the sacrament of confirmation did not attend because they were afraid to. That harkens to a lawsuit that the Georgetown Law School or a clinic within it filed on behalf of a number of religious organizations, in which they made the argument that the administration's no longer respecting the sanctuary protections that had been accorded churches violated both the First Amendment free speech and religious practice, as well as the religious liberty law that had been passed a number of years ago. And I just wondered where that stood and whether the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has ever joined that lawsuit.
I can start, and then Hillary, you can join in too. Thank you, Matthew, for that question. We've been working with the Bishops' Conference on this question of religious freedom and how to protect ourselves and bring a broad group of religious NGOs on it. We're really pleased with that recent case, the Supreme Court case, the Wisconsin case that went up. It should never have gone up, quite frankly. So we're looking at ways to partner with them. But I believe that they have not yet joined. Hillary, is that correct? Do you know?
It's correct. They did not join that particular lawsuit. I think that was back in, I don't know, several months ago now. And I think the Quakers were one of the primary groups that were like one of the named specific groups. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops did not join that. I think it's like institutionally and structurally, it just was a very complicated, because you had to show sort of cause of the harm, and the USCCB couldn't quite do that, because they're not actually running parishes, if that makes sense. So just the way it was structured and worded, because the Quakers, I think, were the first who were saying people can't come to our services, and our services count on the whole congregation being present. The USCCB couldn't fit itself into that kind of an argument.
We did join the amicus brief where we joined on our faith exercise, and I'll send you the brief we signed on in the resettlement case. Even though we are not resettlement agency, we joined that amicus brief to explain how that impacts us and why it's necessary, and the the attorneys handling the case were quite grateful because they've been very worried that the judge would believe that this was really not a free exercise case, but rather a issue involving just the contractual relationship or the money aspect. So I think we played a very valuable role in that. We can send you a copy of that brief.
If I could just say, I think factually the question is totally correct, though. Immigrant
Right.
communities are terrified. They're hunkering down. They're not exposing themselves to places where they think that they might be deported or family members might be deported. And in fact, that is now not to penetrate those places, but not to leave them alone either is part of the U.S. policies. And that kind of exception to places where people's conscience and well-being required them to be, not enforcing kind of raids and other immigration actions in those places is no longer part of the process or the procedures of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So people are really terrified and aren't accessing church services. There is a real religious liberty issue now.
Yes, absolutely.
And we had one other question that was submitted before the town hall, and it is specifically what issues in the next 3 months will you be focusing on?
I mean, the sadly the kind of budget bill passed, and as Kelly indicated, that's it extended tax breaks, of course, and cut Medicaid, and but on the immigration front, what it did was it added $170 billion, excuse me, to immigration enforcement over the next 5 years, which is going to be the money that would supersize the mass deportation programs. So that's kind of a very troubling development. So we will very much be focused on mass deportation at some point, not too much in the distant future. And I think, the next big thing for us, well, what we're dealing with next week is the rescission request for 2025, which is the request that the Trump administration has made to the House and the Senate to approve cuts that it made retroactively and not obligating monies for refugees in 2025. And the House has already agreed to that, and the Senate is going to take that up next week. And then after that, kind of, we would turn to the kind of appropriations issues. And kind of the two ways that refugees lose money is through the loss of the refugee accounts that exist. And the Trump administration supports cutting those two large accounts, the Migration and Refugee Assistance and the International Disaster Assistance account, and also through the appropriations process. So it's, like it's an uphill fight. And we also, as Kelly indicated, please do at least check out the calls to action that we do every week, because we've done 20 of them in a row. Every single week we've done one. Used to be one every month, and now it's one every week. And there's no flagging interest in them in the least, and we get hundreds of new advocates every single week that we do them. But they often cover like 5 or 6 issues. So there'll be a theme, and then there's, 4 examples of kind of where that's happening. And oftentimes after we write them and before we post them, things have changed even, because so much has been going on. So then we have to revise them just before they go out. So it's really lots and lots of issues that we're covering at this point.
Thank you. I have one last question, and this is for both Hillary and Kelly. Reasonably, what can we expect from government funding in the 25-26 government fiscal year? What can we reasonably expect?
Yeah, we can't give you a number yet. The Migration and Refugee account, which is the account that we receive monies from for the past 8 years, where I used to work at the State Department in Population, Refugees, and Migration. That account is no longer existing. So how they're going to restructure it and what they will permit for foreign assistance is still really unclear. It does, the migration refugee account and humanitarian work, as Don said, have huge support on Capitol Hill from both Republicans and Democrats. Traditionally, you couldn't even tell in meetings which was which. But this is what Secretary Rubio has done is, he's going to have a new restructuring with a new person in charge of F. And they even, which is so cynical, put that they might not even do disaster assistance unless it advanced U.S. interest. That was always neutral. There was never any question. We sent food to places where, we have terrible relations. So it is absolutely not clear yet. We won't have any real understanding of that for the coming weeks, but some amount of that will certainly probably go to humanitarian assistance. Secretary Rubio said he wants to prioritize trade over aid. So that's problematic as well. But I can't give you a number right now. No one knows that number. I think even the State Department team working on it has not figured out what they want to propose for that yet. So we will, as I said, we're not going to rely on State Department monies, but if it becomes available and it aligns with our mission and identity, we will seek it. But it's very chaotic and hard to follow what is going on. And I do appreciate the point about speaking to Speaker Johnson and the Vice President's office through directly with Speaker Johnson's office. We've been doing it, and indirectly with with the Vice President. We've been also, I should say, working with the Jesuit Conference very closely on that as well. And so we're trying to work with our justice colleagues over there, Father Chris Kellerman, and we've been doing some advocacy there with key White House officials as well.
Thank you.
Lori, did you want to add anything to that?
Just add from a program operations perspective through our lens. Normally in the business, we talk about spring being proposal season, and that's normally when the U.S. government puts out their calls for proposals, and that didn't happen this spring, of course, obviously. And so already we're kind of behind. And so to Kelly's point, ideally there will be some funding earmarked for this kind of humanitarian assistance. If it aligns with our values and our mission, I can assure that we would, review and try to apply. But the fact that we are already past the normal window, which would have, if successful, provided us sort of new funding for the next fiscal year, which typically starts in the fall and continues on. We've already missed that. Like it can't possibly happen on that kind of a schedule. And so for that reason, when the International Office, the Xavier Network, and JRS USA, when we were working together with all the country offices to figure out, what are the absolute kind of most core critical services, what will it cost? We asked them to prepare budgets through the end of the calendar year to give ourselves as much time as possible to just sort of see what is the new landscape, what is the new likelihood of there being funding from the U.S. government in the next calendar year of 2026. And so I think our other concern, I will just say, is that as they've reduced staffing at these agencies, at Department of State in particular, but other agencies that we might have explored for funding to do work overseas, they're cutting those kind of overseas programs for Department of Labor, for the U.S. Department of Agriculture that used to do work that was in kind of the development world, helping countries and communities in other countries make more robust agriculture and economic systems that might have been dovetailing with our kind of programming. That they've cut those kind of programs, and they've cut the staff as well. And so I think even if there are new funding opportunities, they won't be as well staffed. And so I think the whole process of trying to get new funding may just be more complex and slower and prolonged. So for us, this bridge period of really relying on private funding is so critical. As Patrick said, if when you start closing programs, to restart them is really difficult. So better to sustain even a smaller footprint than to lose it entirely and maybe not be able to restart it, or restart at such a great cost.
Thank you. Tim, I see that you made a comment that people who are detained also lose assets like their furniture, clothing, cars. So there are both direct and indirect effects of deportation and detention, and that's really true. Also, they lose livelihoods, their ability to, support their families. If there are no other questions at this time, we will go ahead and wrap up. Last call for questions. Okay, great. Well, I just want to thank all of you for joining us, and we're really grateful. We're grateful for your solidarity, for your support, for your advocacy, and we're really grateful for your care and concern and your prayers. Please continue to reach out to your elected officials, especially if you are in a red or a blue state. Reach out to your friends and neighbors and colleagues. And we will go ahead and send follow-up information that has a downloadable report on the first 120 days. It will give you a link to a web page, and you can download information from that web page. We will also post this recording on that web page. And so it should be easy for you to pass that information on. And there's also information on our advocacy efforts on there. So I want to make sure that people have that as well. We have asked Matt Ipple to close our meeting from South Sudan. Matt Ipple, thank you.
Thank you, Cindy, and thanks everyone too, all the interventions and the conversation, the questions. So I thought I would just offer maybe a few words about, so I was in our DC office with our team at JRS USA in late January when we received the notice of the stop work order, and then kind of this unleashing of policies. And I definitely recall that experience quite vividly, of just a shared expression of frustration and sadness, of disappointment, uncertainty. And I think particularly the colleagues who work so closely with projects like Maban, or think of Patrick's team and teams in Western Africa and the Great Lakes region and around the globe, but our team members who not only work closely with JRS colleagues in these locations, but also have had opportunities to visit and help kind of discern and plan projects, for upcoming years and to evaluate current ones. And just I remember those colleagues in particular just sharing the sadness for the people, JRS colleagues, in places like Maban, but also the communities in which our teams serve and work with and walk with. And fast forward then 6-7 months, and I'm back here in Maban. I had worked in Maban for 3 years as part of my Jesuit formation, and I'd say similar with our teams here, is similar experience, similar feelings of frustration and just a lot of questions and concerns about their families, but also about the people and communities that we work with and have partnered with, of what the future has in store. And I'd say the moment I arrived in Maban a few weeks back, it was very evident the reduction in humanitarian presence and assistance. So a lot of what Patrick shared resonates with here in Maban. Obviously, each context is a little different, but here in the camps, there's no longer the general food distribution, so the monthly food rations It's now only for a certain category of vulnerability. In the classrooms, there's fewer teachers, a lot of protection challenges. Some of the youth I previously worked with are, some are kind of staying strong and continuing to work and do certain activities and at our JRS centers through our MHPSS, our psychosocial work. I was saddened to see some youth who've, because of losing a job or an engagement with an NGO, now seem to kind of resort to alcohol or drugs or things like that to try to cope with these really harsh and difficult times. So the picture is quite bleak. And so I thought that at the same time, I think as a Jesuit and Catholic organization, and given our rich history, we're also an organization filled with hope, hope that I think we share with, but also that we receive from the communities that we have the opportunity to walk with. And as I was reflecting on that, there are three things, I think, three areas of hope, places and people where I find hope. And one is with our JRS team. And I think specifically of the team on the ground here. Our model is based on accompaniment. We remain with people in their communities, striving to respond to the needs, at least some of their needs. And amidst all of this and this kind of up and down and even the uncertainty come August onwards, our teams continue to show up. Our staff are there and they're present individuals to families, to communities. And our presence is very pastoral. It's very, it's open to everyone, extends to everyone, regardless of their background. But it recognizes the dignity of the person in front of us and the people in front of us. And so that for me is a huge sense of hope. A second one would be the people themselves. In the case of Mabon refugees, by and large, but also members of the local community. A refugee friend the other day, I was asking him, so he's in secondary school in senior 2 out of 4. Now, many refugees have gone back to their home country in Sudan. A number of them have, and some of them now wanting to come back because it's quite difficult there. But I asked him why he didn't leave, and he says he really wants to finish his studies because for him, only education, he says, will help him have a better future. And be able to help his family and to help his community. For me, where education has been something so easy in the sense of that my parents have been extremely supportive of, and not to mention the Jesuits, just to see that real grit and desire to continue onward, to struggle onward, is a huge source of hope. And then lastly, the third, and these aren't in order by any way. And actually, I think they work together. But the third is this network of friends and partners who believe in our mission and support it generously. So all of you and people off this call who extend their support, whether that's prayers or financial contributions or advocacy work. And there's this, for us, I think, this sense of feeling that we're not alone. And so there's this deep gratitude that because of the generosity of so many, we're able to have this privilege of carrying out our mission here in Mabon and in so many other places. So I close with that, these sense of hope among our JRS team, among the refugees and members of the local community, and a sense of hope that comes from our network of partners and friends.
Thank you, Matt. That was beautiful. Thank you all for joining us. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And we're grateful for each of you. Thank you.